Alright, good morning everyone. So, I have got Bridgeport Series 1 that I'm working on here. This machine had a really bad clatter in it. I went and looked at it. They had run it until the point that it had absolutely destroyed the motor shaft, the front pulley. It had wiped the bushings right out of the front pulley. If you're not familiar with these Bridgeport variable speeds, they got these I call them plastic, probably nylon or something, bushings anyways, in both the motor pulley and the front pulley that's up at the quill end of the operation. So anyhow, this, I didn't document any of it, but I put a whole new motor shaft in here. So I tore the motor down. There's not a lot you've got to know about that. Other than, so the motor, you have to get the stationary, I call it stationary, but the pulley that does not move on the shaft off. These things break pretty easy. We get on them with a 3-jaw puller, we load them up. You got to make sure it gets set screw loose because there's set screw in it. But then, I don't know, I'd say no more than 1 out of about every 6 will come off with just pulling it. And then we start putting heat on. Now, I've discovered that it works the best to get the heat in from the backside. The problem with that is it's guaranteed direct bearing. But if you're replacing the motor armature, you ought to be replacing the bearings anyways. So I would just suggest you put a little load on it and go to it, because otherwise I think this is like a couple $100 part and there's no reason to replace it. It's never bad. It only ever gets wrecked trying to remove it. So anyways, so once you get that off though, it's just pulling this back cover off. It's pretty self-explanatory. The fan is a press fit. Get behind it with 2 big screwdrivers or pry bars, pop it off, and then there's 4 strut bolts that go all the way through there, and then we lay them on their side and you start tapping on the back end of the shaft. Now the one thing you want to be a little bit careful of is you're going to leave the wires all going to the windings in there, but this outer case where this housing attaches is not actually connected to the inner aluminum extruded housing, and the wires are going through that, and if you're beating and pounding and reefing on it, you can start destroying the insulation on them wires pretty easy. So lay it on its side, be kind of gentle with it, because what you're trying to do is tap out the armature with this base plate attached to it. Then the one thing that I would suggest, so you get that off, that's not a super heavy duty casting. So take that thing, prop it on these ears upside down between a couple of blocks, and just take a torch, even a propane torch, start heating up that aluminum, and within just a matter of minutes, it'll expand enough that the bearing will just drop right out of there with the armature. At that point, if we're replacing the armature, I don't even bother taking the bearings off in it because both bearings have stayed with it. So I put new bearings, tap those onto the shaft. That's what I've got 2 different size pieces of tube, one that's the right size to tap the small bearing on, one the right size to tap the large bearing on. And then when you're going back together, the biggest thing you got to watch is in the top housing, where the smaller bearing goes, it's got one of those wavy washers behind it, and those like to fall out. Like you have it laying outside, make sure that thing's in there. Sometimes we'll put some grease on it. The bearing's a sealed, or at least a shielded bearing, so it doesn't care about the grease. But at least that'll keep that thing stuck in there while you get this slid in. I do put marks on this stuff when I take it apart, just to help get it back together in the same orientation. And then as you can see, this is just a hillbilly bracket. It's made out of the same piece of this tube, because when you're putting it back together, once you get the basic pieces slid together laying on the bench, it's very helpful to stand it back up like this, or taking it apart for that matter too, and be able to tap and tunk and get these sections lined up. Getting the bolt holes lined up is quite a stunt. I shine a flashlight through the bottom hole and then start tapping pieces around until I can see daylight all the way through before I put the bolt in. So that all got done off camera. But then this particular one, this is the front pulley. And I apologize, I wasn't thinking about it. I hadn't started videoing yet. But these bushings, the reason they're getting replaced is they weren't actually wore out. They weren't that loose, but the epoxy had all broke loose on them. So the bushings were just loose in there. And that's just the beginning of failure right there on the spot. So what you're going to discover is you've got to get all the old epoxy scraped out of there. Now, I did already pull the bearing off too, by the way. This has this bearing housing on it. And that you're going to discover, I've got a modified puller I should just show you. Whoops. This housing is so close to the surface that most pullers, the jaws are too heavy to fit in there. So you can see I've ground these ones down so that they'll fit underneath the edge of that. And then I've also made myself a plug that fits on the end. I've got this machine so that it fits inside of the bushings with those in there. And then something else I want to point out, sometimes these bearings go bad, the bushings aren't bad, and you want to pull that thing off. If you just do that indiscriminately with something pushing on the end here, these bushings frequently stick out past the edge a little, you will break the bushings loose. So this one, you can't see it on the camera, but I've machined this so that this ledge on it has a concave surface, so that it's actually touching out around the outside specifically so that it will not be touching the bushings if I have to pull a bearing without wanting to replace the bushings. Now in this one it didn't matter because the bushings were bad anyways, but just mentioning that, you got to be careful about it if you're replacing this bearing. This bearing was shot, had a nasty howl to it. So anyways, you get down to the stage, and for years we scraped and scraped and scraped. You know, your typical three-corner scraper. The epoxy that the factory uses is just some of the most gnarly stuff. The aftermarket replacement stuff that you get with a bushing kit is this urethane, and maybe the factory's is epoxy and this stuff is urethane. I don't know what the difference is. All I can tell you is this stuff's a lot softer. If you do one where somebody has already had it apart once, you'll discover it scrapes out pretty readily. The factory ones, it is super hard. So after fighting, I tried all kinds of solvents. What I finally discovered here a while back is the way to do these things, and this is what I didn't show you on camera, is take that sucker, stand it up on edge, get your welding gloves on, and just take your torch and start heating the shiznits out of the inside of that thing. When you get her to where it starts bubbling and trying to light that stuff on fire a bit, you're ready. Come over, leave it hot, and like this one's starting to cool off enough to where I can touch it now, but when I first got done I had to handle it with welding gloves, and that stuff just begs to be let out of there. Like, I'm not joking, it will save you 10 minutes of really annoying scraping. Like, I got a couple little spots of it still in here, and once it's been heated, even after it cools off, it really compromises the integrity of that stuff, and it just peels right out of there. So anyway, that's the first thing you got to know, is get that stuff all out. You can't leave any of it behind, because here's the problem. You've got this arbor, and you'll see this process now, but this gets the bushings to the right size when we're installing them, but the problem is it doesn't guarantee that you're on center. You know, there is a thin film of, in this instance, urethane going behind that bushing. And the problem is if you leave any of the old stuff behind, you run a good chance that you get basically held up on that bit of old stuff and that now your bushings are a bit off center. And I got to tell you right now, there's a pretty high percentage of these that have at least a little bit of vibration to them after you put aftermarket bushings in. It's unavoidable. As far as I can tell, I believe that Bridgeport assembled these with their bushings, and I think they balanced them afterwards. So if you end up slightly off, it's not catastrophic to them, but don't be shocked if you get just the slightest bit of vibration that you don't remember your machine having in the old days. But that said, if you're careful doing this, you've got the best odds of it coming out good. And I would say 3/4 of them, when I get done with them, they're running smooth. There's no perceivable vibration in it. So anyways, this one's all cleaned out now. So the next thing that you gotta do, and this is one, I'm gonna quick go wash my hands off. I got a bunch of gunk on them I don't want in the next process. Alright, and I should mention that pretty much everything you're about to see applies to either the motor pulley, the sliding motor pulley, or to the pulley on the spindle end of the operation. So when you get your new bushings, these things were injection molded, and they have a super slippery smooth finish on them. You want to take a nice sharp knife, in this instance a razor, and just shave down the sides of them. Get rid of that super smooth surface. If you don't do this, I guarantee you within the first week of operation, your bushings are no longer glued in place and they're rattling around, and you're well on your way to your next set of bushings going bad. So do not ignore this step. I have thought about, never tried it. I think you could probably sand them also, but this just works pretty good. So we just go around here and just light sideways scrape and shave off that top super shiny layer, and you'll see it's getting a dull matte kind of finish behind me as I go here. And of course, all those little shavings have lots of static cling going on, and we try our best to never touch the faces that we're about to try and glue. Alright, so this thing is going to get the new bearing put on now before I put those bushings in, because I don't want to be pressing and shoving on it after I've installed the new bushings. So I'm going to go take this thing over to the arbor press and we'll push this in. I'll take you along over there for the ride. And yeah, you get to see this whole process. This ain't rocket science. Alright. I don't spend a lot of time worrying about whether that's perfectly bottomed out in there. By the way, everybody's got their own pet theory as to whether you put the bearing on there first or in here. I kind of like doing it this way. This direction pretty much self-aligns, but if you're trying to put this onto there, it's cracking around, rocking around, it drives you nuts. So anyway, just my 2 cents. Alright, now, where it gets a little trickier, I haven't got my normal pushing piece, so I'm having to use one that the size isn't quite perfect for what I'm doing here. Alright, oh by golly, there we are, pressed together. Looks pretty good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get a rag, soak it down with some thinner, and wipe the inside of that bore up now to make doggone sure. I have already, I've already at some point sprayed it out before now, but this, I've been handling it, been touching it. Obviously oil and our urethane are mortal enemies. Will not stick with that on there, so we want her as clean as we can get it. Now most of the time I'd grab this thing of ice, but today we're going to grab it here. I just need a way to hold it up on an edge like this. You want it with the keyway up, by the way, because what we're about to do is going to have some extra goop involved, and you do not want all that extra goop to run into the keyway and have to get cut out later. That just adds extra complication unnecessarily to the project. Alright, so we take these things, get them staged here, get the cutout for the keyway lined up. Trying my best to not touch the edges any more than I absolutely have to, but it's another reason for the rag on the pulley, is then that rag is also taking the oil off my fingers while we're at it. So you get them staged like that, and then it's time for me to get myself a piece of cardboard here and start mixing up epoxy. Oh, so by the way, I didn't tell you why it is I'm doing this instead of in the vise. It's because that wood stove is running behind you. And I happen to have a great appreciation for warmth. And while it's comfortable on the other side of the shop, it's not scorching hot like it is here. And I really don't know why I was born in Michigan. It seems to me like God in His infinite wisdom would have known that I liked warm weather and would have had me born say down at least in Kentucky or Tennessee, but for some reason he thought I needed to be here in Michigan, so here we are. You won't find me waxing eloquent about snowmobiling and cross-country skiing. I am one of those people that pretty much tries my best to hibernate for the winter and not go outdoors if I can help it. Alright, time for some mixing action. If I had my head screwed on straight, I would have pumped up this Big Joe a bit more before I started this, but this epoxy, or I should call it epoxy, urethane by the way, sets off pretty quick, so you don't want to be playing games while you're doing this, or you'll discover that when you go to put that, I don't know what you'd call it, arbor in the inside, that she don't go so good, because the urethane is starting to get hard enough that, because, you know, it's too thick in here, basically, when you first put it together, and you're squeezing it out, shoving that thing in there, as you'll see. And if you have dilly-dallied too long at this stage, then you'll discover you have one heck of a time getting that thing squished in there. Never had one refuse, but it definitely will make a believer out of you. Got a little bit of that good old-fashioned pucker factor going on then. Obviously the goal here is to slide it in without scraping all of your new urethane off, if at all humanly possible. Alright, now here's the arbor that goes in there. Oil this thing up. If you don't do this, you will not get this thing back out. It is going to end up with urethane on it. Make sure especially get some on the ends because it's going to flow over the ends. Alright, now you want to make sure that you're centered on your key slots right now. This is your last chance to fix that. Now, if by some freak chance you get to the end of this and you have accidentally turned one a little bit and it's over the edge of the keyway, don't despair. Done that before myself. You just take a file and get in there and see, this one's plenty tight, even as it is. This is where you do not want to be dilly-dallying and getting one hard. Okay, a little bit more. There we are. And then you want to leave this thing sitting with the keyway upright to cure, because otherwise the extra will be running into your keyway. There you have it. That thing can sit there now and cure itself to its heart's content. And then I'll bring you back to show you. Basically, we let it set up a while. Yummy, I got some on my C-clamps threads. That'll be nice. Anyways, let that cure. You don't want to let it get hard. I found out if you let it cure all the way, even with the oil on there, you're going to have a bear of a time getting that arbor back out of there. So what I'll do is take my razor knife, shave the extra off around the edges, and then shove that plug out. Basically, when it gets to the stage, I leave this laying around, kind of poking at it with my finger. When it gets to the stage where you can like leave a dent in it with your finger, but it's mostly firm, or your fingernail, but it's mostly firmed up, then at that point I go ahead and pull that arbor out of there. All right. Get ready to switch this whole operation over and do installation of that stationary pulley on the motor. You can't see this is anything special. I just got a piece of conduit that's the right size for that slip into it. Makes it a lot easier to work on the motors if you throw yourself something like this together. And as you can see, all of this black dust is because they ran this one so long it had destroyed the belt. This is all ground up rubber, which that's one other thing you got to kind of watch out for is I'm using a torch on it. It loves to light on fire and smolder. It'll smoke you right out of your shop. Not to mention it makes a terrible mess. Alright, I'm just wanting to get this set back here near the back edge of my bench. So something else I should mention is you got to be careful when you're working on these. You got them flipped over. You bend these screws super easy. If you get to pushing, pulling, tugging, you will definitely jack one of them up. Alright, I've got to go find a set screw for this. This one was completely missing when I took it apart. Somebody had been in here before me and just left it out of there, so I got to go round one up. I'll be right back. Alright, found a set screw in my collection. It's acting a little bit flaky about going in there. I'm going to sand it. It's got some burrs. I'm just going to go put it on a flat surface and sand it slightly. You never really know the history on this kind of stuff when you're working on it, so who knows what it's been through before. Oh, I see. My brand new shaft has a burr in the keyway. I mean, brand spanking new. It looks like it probably got dropped against another shaft somewhere at the plant when they were making it. Here I'm blaming the key, it's the brand new parts. Oh yeah, look at that, it slips right in there now. Okay, so I'm going to put a little bit of oil around here. We use a lot of 3-in-1 oil putting this kind of stuff together, just to make sure that everybody slides nice. Ka-tunk, there she was. That's what's so amazing about, so when you take these off, this is something I do not understand. Like I mentioned, you almost always have to heat this up. Get behind that, warm and warm and warm and warm, and what you'll discover is it's helpful to have a puller on it, put heat on it, and have an impact gun on it because it'll cool off and lock back up. It's not like you get it moving once and it goes, no, it'll like pop, 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 and then stop. So anyways, what's crazy to me about that is that when you get them off and you clean them up, they drop right back on. It's always rust in there, and that's the part that I don't get. How on earth, in a shop environment, does that rust? It's not like these things will be all crusty. I've never been able to make sense out of why that particular component will develop just ridiculous amounts of rust. That's what I just had to go before I was on camera and sand the inside of that shiv to get the rust out of it. Alright, so something else that I do is down here, some of these keys, this is one of them, stick up a bit proud, and I don't know if the belt frequently, if ever, gets down there, but I'd like to not get the belt chewed on by hitting that key, so I file them down when I run into ones that are like this. And maybe this isn't that big of a deal, but it just seems like a good idea to me. So. I'd just like to know that we're not pre-destroying a belt. Okay, so that motor is ready to install. I say ready to install. I guess technically I can put this on a minute. The new motor pulley. The old one, by the way, had hammered around so bad that it had the hole in the center wallowed out oversized by, I'm going to say, close to 1/8 of an inch. Oh, something else you got to watch on these. A lot of times there will be a bit of a burr around this snap ring groove and in the keyway where it crosses that, especially on these ones, and you'll be shaving your nice brand new components as you put it together. So we generally this, by the way, the reason it's stopping is this end cap can be ever so slightly out of alignment with, there she goes. Alright, looking good. Now I just got to go figure out where, I think I've got the snap ring with the rest of the parts out in the truck from working on this. I got to go retrieve that a minute. Alright, I found him. Oh, by the way, these Jimmy Dean's turkey sausage breakfast sandwiches are the bomb. By the way, you don't want this to slide this hard if it's being caused by the bushings themselves. But in this instance, I happen to know it's not. It's the plate on the end, and the reason I know that so firmly is because it slid on. Oh yeah, look at that, I bumped it over now. Anyway, if that is too tight, and you're running the same thing on the front pulley, more this one, if you get that, you should be able to slide them up and down on the shaft by hand. If you've got to tap on them to make a move or pry on them, like this one, okay, now it's sliding nice. You're going to have a really stiff cranking handle. Now that poses a problem, and that is that how do you get it loosened up? We go in there with a half-round file, and I don't love it because it tends to make a lot of little furries in the surface of that synthetic material. And I'm afraid that those wear back off pretty quick. So like you get it in there, you get it moving, you file on it, you're basically pre-wearing it a bit. But sometimes that's just the only option you've got. You got to do it because they have to slide nice. You get one where you got a reef on it, the poor sucker that's got to run the crank to run the speed up and down on that thing is going to be cussing you out. What'll happen is when you're trying to go down in speed, it'll turn hard, and when you're trying to go up in speed, the pulleys, because this spring is all that pushes it the other way, if they're moving too hard, you'll get it to where you'll crank it and you won't get any speed increase, and you'll hear it slowly like boom, and then all of a sudden it'll take off as the pulleys start moving. It won't track with the motion on the handle. So just keep that in mind. There's kind of a fine line between too tight and not tight enough. I like to have them with a little bit of drag on them because obviously the tighter they are, the longer they'll wear, but everybody's got their own preference on that. But let's see here how my urethane is feeling. Yeah, see, it's still a little soft. I think I'm going to load this stuff in the truck and knock that apart when I get on site, so you won't see that process. But like I said, I just take a razor knife, trim the excess off, shove that arbor out of there, and if it won't move, I take like a dead blow hammer and smack it a few times. They'll usually pop out of there. And then if there's any of the urethane that's flowed over into the keyway, I just take a nice fine cut file, go in there, shave it so that I can put the key back in. Anyway, that's about it. Oh, one other thing. On this pulley, if you do the bushings in this one, when you put that key back in, do yourself a favor and lock tight the living daylights out of that little screw that holds that key in. Especially if you're doing power tapping, it likes to jar and rattle and loosen that screw up. And once it does, all hell unleashes itself in there, and you will probably wreck a motor pulley and who knows, maybe even the motor shaft. So Matter of fact, I don't just Loctite up the screw. I put a bunch of Loctite in around the key when I put it in. Like, fill in the gaps, give that thing as much support as you possibly can. I don't worry about the front ones. Those ones, frankly, I don't ever see give trouble, and they're an all plastic key. But this one, where it's plastic wrapped around a steel core, bad stuff happens if that thing comes loose. So Loctite her up, red Loctite, and you'll be good to go. So I guess that's about it for this one, guys. If you got any questions, feel free to post them in the comments section. I am not what I would consider an expert on these in the proper sense of the word. My friend Ed, who I've worked with for the last 10-15 years, is an expert. He's been doing this for like 50 years. I've only been at it, like, say, 10-15 years as far as rebuilding this Bridgeport stuff. But if you got questions I can't answer, I'll pass them on to Ed and see if he's got an answer.